The rain did not begin as drops. It came down like a wall of water, crashing through the trees of the alien jungle. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter, but the water had already soaked through. His boots sank into the mud with every step, and the path he had followed just minutes ago was gone, swallowed by rushing streams. The air was heavy, thick, and full of the roar of water. He knew he had to find higher ground fast, or the flood would take him. The river that had been calm in the morning was now a monster. Its waves smashed against fallen trees, carrying broken branches and even the carcass of a large alien beast downstream. Ethan's heart raced. One wrong move, and he would be the next thing dragged under. He kept moving along the slippery slope, searching for something solid to climb. Lightning split the sky, showing him the forest turning into an endless lake. Then he saw her. At first, he thought it was another piece of debris caught in the flood. But no, it was a figure clinging to a broken tree trunk. Long hair, silver in the rain, plastered against her face. Her skin was pale blue, glowing faintly even under the storm clouds. She was not human. She was alien. She looked weak, her hands shaking as she held onto the tree, her legs almost slipping into the water. Ethan did not think. He rushed toward her, fighting the current that tried to drag him back. Every step was a battle. The water reached his knees, then his waist, then his chest. The roar was so loud he could barely hear his own breath. His arms burned as he pushed forward, the weight of water almost crushing him. But his eyes stayed on her. She looked terrified, and her lips were moving as if she was whispering for help. "Hold on," Ethan shouted, though he was not sure if she understood him. The storm swallowed his voice, but her eyes turned toward him, wide with disbelief. Humans were not supposed to be here, not in this place. A wave hit the tree, and she screamed. Her grip slipped. Ethan lunged forward, grabbing her wrist just as the current tried to tear her away. Her skin was colder than ice, smooth and strange, but her fear was the same as any being's. He pulled with all his strength, his muscles burning, until he dragged her onto a small patch of mud beside him. They both collapsed, coughing, gasping for air. For a moment, they simply lay there. Rain beat against their faces, water rose around them, and still neither moved. Ethan looked at her more closely. She was young, maybe no older than himself. She wore strange armor, now cracked and heavy with water. Her eyes, glowing faint violet, studied him with suspicion. She tried to speak, but the words were in her tongue, sharp and musical, meaningless to him. Yet her tone was clear. She did not trust him. Ethan pushed himself to sit. "If we stay here, we die," he said, pointing to the rising water. She followed his gesture, and her eyes widened. She understood enough. The mud patch was shrinking, soon to be swallowed. He scanned the area. The only chance was to reach higher ground, a rocky slope half buried in vines, but it was across the rushing water. The current was fast, pulling trees and boulders like toys. Swimming through it with their clothes and armor would be close to suicide. Still, it was the only choice. He grabbed her arm gently, trying to make her look at him. He pointed at the slope, then at themselves, then made a swimming motion. She frowned, but finally nodded. But when she tried to stand, her armor dragged her down. She stumbled, falling to her knees. The metal plates were pulling her into the mud, making every movement heavy. Ethan realized his own clothes, soaked and heavy, would also be a death trap in the water. He cursed under his breath. "We'll drown like this," he muttered. She tilted her head, not understanding the words, but reading the fear in his face. Then she looked at her armor, then at the water, and her expression changed. She understood. Another flash of lightning showed the truth of their situation. The water was already at their knees again. They had seconds, not minutes. Ethan's fingers trembled as he pulled off his jacket, throwing it aside. The weight vanished instantly from his shoulders, but the thought of what came next made his stomach twist. He glanced at the alien girl. She hesitated, her eyes wide with shame, but she began to unclip the plates of her armor too. One by one, the metal pieces fell into the mud, vanishing under the water. Neither spoke, neither needed to. The flood gave them no choice. Their lives depended on what they left behind. Rain slid down their bare skin, and the air felt colder than knives. Ethan's heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the strange closeness forced upon them. This was not how strangers from different worlds were meant to meet. Another crash echoed through the storm. A tree trunk smashed against the remains of their tiny island, breaking it apart. Ethan grabbed her hand. She flinched at his touch, but did not pull away. Together, they looked at the raging flood between them and the slope. He met her eyes, gave a small nod, and without another word, they jumped into the water. The flood swallowed them instantly. The current dragged them down, spinning them like leaves. Ethan kicked hard, pulling her with him, fighting toward the rocks. His chest burned, his arms screamed, but he did not let go of her. She clung to him too, not with trust yet, but with desperation. Above, lightning lit the sky again, showing the violent world they were trapped in. And in that storm, one thought filled Ethan's mind. If they failed, no one would ever know their story. If they survived, everything between them would change forever. The water pulled at their bodies, dragging them under, spinning them again and again, until finally, Ethan's hands touched the slippery side of the rocky slope. With the last of his strength, he pushed the alien girl upward. She clawed at the rock, her fingers slipping, but somehow she managed to climb a little higher. Ethan followed, lungs burning, chest heavy, until both of them collapsed on a ledge just above the flood. The river roared below, swallowing everything, while the rain poured like needles from the sky. For a long moment, they just lay there, coughing out the water they had swallowed. Their bodies shook with exhaustion, but the storm gave them no rest. The ledge was narrow, and waves still splashed up, soaking them again. Ethan knew they could not stay. The water was climbing, inch by inch. If they did not move soon, the flood would cover even this place. He looked at her. She was shivering violently, her pale blue skin glowing faintly under the flashes of lightning. Her armor was gone now, stripped off in the mud below, but even the thin cloth she wore clung to her like a wet chain, pulling her down with weight. Ethan glanced at himself. His soaked shirt and trousers stuck to his skin like a second skin, dragging at his chest, his legs, making it hard to breathe. Every movement felt heavier. He understood what this meant. If they had to swim again, the clothes would kill them faster than the water. The realization hit him like another wave. They would have to undress further, not just jackets and armor, but everything that could drag them down. The thought made his stomach twist. He was human, raised with his own rules of shame and modesty. She was alien, raised in a world he knew nothing about. Would stripping be an insult to her? Would she see it as weakness, or even worse? He tried to speak, but his words came out broken from coughing. We can't make it like this. He pulled at his heavy shirt to show her. Then he tugged at his trousers, shaking his head. She stared at him in silence, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dark. For a moment, he thought she didn't understand, but then she looked down at her own soaked clothes. Her expression tightened, and her hands froze in hesitation. Another crash shook the ledge as a log smashed against the rocks below. Water splashed up to their knees. They didn't have time for pride or culture or fear. Ethan swallowed hard, gritted his teeth, and pulled his shirt over his head. The wet cloth slapped against the rock as he threw it aside. His chest heaved in the cold air, and goosebumps covered his skin instantly. The rain stung like ice, and shame burned in his face, but he forced himself not to care. The alien girl's eyes widened. She blinked at him, her lips parting slightly as though surprised. He wondered if she thought humans were too fragile, too modest to dare such a thing. His heart pounded harder, not from the storm, but from the weight of her gaze. He could barely breathe, yet he met her eyes and gave a small nod, as if to say, "Your turn." She trembled, looking at the rushing water below, then back at him. Her hands moved slowly, hesitantly, as she tugged at the straps of her soaked tunic. The cloth clung to her like vines, but she peeled it away piece by piece, dropping it onto the rock where the flood quickly carried it off. Her body glowed faintly in the storm's light, the strange markings of her species visible now across her shoulders and sides. She kept her arms folded tightly around herself, avoiding his eyes. But she had made the choice. She would trust him, at least enough to survive. Ethan forced himself to focus on the water instead of her. The storm was their real enemy, not each other. He pulled off his trousers, leaving only the bare minimum for decency, and felt the instant relief of freedom. The crushing weight on his legs was gone. He could move again. He could fight the current. Another flash of lightning lit the sky, showing the rocky slope ahead. It was still far, another stretch of dangerous swimming, but possible now. He pointed toward it, his hands shaking from cold. "We go," he said, hoping she would understand. She followed his finger and nodded quickly, though her eyes still shone with fear. Then, without warning, a massive wave slammed against the ledge. The force almost tore them both off the rock. Ethan grabbed her arm, steadying her, and she clutched his hand tightly. Their bare skin pressed together, cold and trembling, yet warm in places where the heat of life still fought against the storm. He realized how fragile she felt under his grip, how easily the water could take her away if he let go. They had no choice. They had to move now. He took one last deep breath, then pulled her with him as he jumped back into the flood. The icy water wrapped around them instantly, dragging them under. But this time, with their clothes gone, their bodies cut through the current faster. Ethan's muscles screamed as he kicked, pulling her along. She clung to him with desperate strength, her glowing eyes locked on the rocks ahead. For a moment, it felt almost like the water wanted to swallow them whole. Each wave crashed down like a giant hand, trying to push them under. Each second felt longer than a lifetime. But they pushed on, driven not by trust or friendship, but by the raw instinct to live. When Ethan's hand finally touched stone again, relief shot through him like fire. He hauled himself up, dragging her beside him. They collapsed once more on a higher ledge, gasping, shaking, but alive. The storm still roared around them, but for the first time, they had beaten it together. And yet, lying side by side, stripped by necessity, soaked and trembling, both of them knew survival had just created something far more complicated than the flood itself. The flood carried the smell of rot and mud, but soon Ethan noticed another smell mixed in with the storm. Something sharp, almost metallic, like blood in the water. He frowned, scanning the river below. The alien girl clung beside him on the ledge, still trembling from the cold, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She sensed it too. Her head turned, her nostrils flaring, and she whispered words in her own tongue, low and fearful. Ethan could not understand, but he didn't need to. He knew danger when he saw it. The water below rippled in strange ways, not like normal waves. Long shapes moved under the surface, too quick and too large to be ordinary fish. Ethan's muscles tensed. The girl's hand gripped his arm, her nails sharp against his skin. She pointed toward the river, her eyes wide with warning. Then it appeared. A dark shape burst from the water with a hiss, jaws snapping shut like steel. Its teeth were long and jagged, glowing faintly with some kind of slime. Its body was like a snake, but thicker, armored with rough scales. It lunged at the ledge, snapping just inches from Ethan's leg, before falling back into the water with a splash. The sound echoed like thunder. The girl cried out in her language, pulling at Ethan's arm, urging him higher. But before they could move, another shape rose, and then another. Soon the water below boiled with creatures, their glowing teeth flashing as they circled. They had been hiding under the flood, waiting for prey washed down by the storm. And now they had found it. Ethan pulled the girl close against the rock. His heart pounded, but his mind raced with survival. He had no weapon, nothing but his own strength and a few jagged stones scattered on the ledge. He grabbed one, its edge sharp enough to cut skin, and held it tight in his hand. The girl stared at him, surprised that he would even think of fighting such monsters. The first creature struck again, rising higher this time. Its body slapped against the rock, its jaws snapping toward the girl. She screamed, but Ethan shoved her behind him and slammed the stone into the creature's face. The impact cracked one of its glowing teeth, and dark fluid sprayed across the rock. The beast screeched and fell back into the water, thrashing wildly. The others grew excited, their movements faster, their hunger rising. They circled below, waiting for the moment one of them would slip. The girl clutched Ethan's arm tightly, her voice shaking as she spoke. He could not understand her words, but he heard the plea inside them. She thought they would both die here. Ethan shook his head. No, he muttered, more to himself than to her. He had not come this far to die in some alien flood. He glanced at the higher rocks above them. If they could climb fast enough, maybe they could escape the predators. But the moment he moved, one of the creatures would strike. The girl seemed to understand his eyes. She nodded quickly, pointing upward. She would try to climb, but she was weak from the storm. She could barely grip the rock. Ethan knew he would have to protect her while she moved. He crouched low, stone still in his hand, watching the water. One of the beasts slithered closer, its eyes glowing under the surface. Suddenly, it shot upward, jaws open. Ethan threw himself forward, ramming the stone into its throat. The beast writhed, screaming, before sinking back, dark blood swirling around it. But as Ethan fought that one, another lunged from the side. Its teeth scraped against his arm, tearing skin. He shouted in pain, but swung again, smashing the stone down on its snout until it retreated. Behind him, the girl had begun climbing. Her hands shook. Her movements were slow, but she was rising inch by inch. She looked back, her glowing eyes full of fear, as Ethan fought below. He yelled at her, though she did not understand the words. "Climb! Don't stop!" The largest beast appeared then, rising higher than the others. Its body was massive, its jaw wide enough to swallow a man whole. It rose with a roar, snapping toward the girl as she hung just above. She screamed, her fingers slipping on the wet stone. Without thinking, Ethan dropped the bloody stone and leaped. His arms wrapped around the creature's head, pulling it away from her. Its teeth ripped into his shoulder, pain exploding through him, but he held on, forcing it back into the water. The current dragged both him and the beast under. The girl's cry echoed through the storm as Ethan disappeared. The water closed above him, black and full of thrashing bodies. He could feel the creature's jaws tearing at him, dragging him deeper. But his fists struck again and again, hitting its eyes, its throat, anywhere soft. His lungs screamed for air, but he refused to let go. The beast's body thrashed, shaking him like a rag, but he held on with human fury, stabbing at its eye with his broken fingers, until black fluid burst into the water. Finally, the beast released him, thrashing away into the depths. Ethan kicked upward, every part of his body burning, his chest about to explode. The surface seemed too far. The storm's light flashed faintly above him, but his limbs were weak, his blood clouding the water. He thought he might not make it. Then, suddenly, a hand grabbed his wrist. The girl was leaning down from the rocks, her face twisted with fear and determination. She pulled with all her strength, dragging him upward. His head broke the surface, and he coughed violently, choking on the air. Together, she hauled him onto the ledge above. They collapsed side by side, gasping, shaking, bleeding. The beasts still circled below, their glowing eyes watching, but they did not climb. For now, Ethan and the girl were safe. She looked at him with wide eyes, her lips trembling. Slowly, she reached out and touched the torn skin on his shoulder, as if she could not believe he had risked his life for her. Her voice shook as she whispered words he did not understand, but the meaning was clear. She saw him differently now, not as weak, not as prey, but as someone stronger than the predators themselves. And though the storm still raged, a new kind of silence passed between them. The silence of two strangers who had bled together, who now shared a bond written in fear, pain, and survival. The storm finally began to weaken, but the jungle was still dripping and alive with strange sounds. Ethan leaned against the rock wall, breathing heavily. His shoulder throbbed with pain where the creature's teeth had torn into him. Blood had slowed, but the wound was deep. The alien girl sat close, her glowing eyes never leaving him. She looked both frightened and curious, like she did not know what to do with the man who had just fought death for her. They had climbed higher after the attack, reaching a small cave hidden in the slope. It was dry inside, though the air was damp and smelled of moss. The cave was dark, but Ethan managed to gather broken pieces of wood that had washed in during the flood. With trembling hands, he struck stone against stone until sparks caught. Soon, a small fire flickered between them, its light painting the walls with orange shadows. The warmth filled the cave, and for the first time since the flood began, there was silence. The girl's body still shook from the cold. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her hair wet and tangled around her face. Ethan watched her carefully. She looked fragile, yet there was something powerful in the way she held herself, as if she carried the weight of a hidden truth. She glanced at him, then away, as if ashamed. Her lips moved, and she spoke softly in her alien tongue. He couldn't understand, but her tone was heavy, almost sad. Ethan placed his hand on his chest and said slowly, "Ethan." He tapped again, repeating, "Ethan." The girl tilted her head, then pointed at him. "Ethun," she repeated, her accent strange but close. Then she touched her own chest. "Lyra," she said. Her voice was soft, almost like a song. Ethan gave a small smile. Lyra, he repeated, and she nodded. For a moment, the storm outside felt far away, but as the fire grew stronger, he noticed her staring at the flames with a mixture of wonder and fear. She reached out her hand toward the heat, then quickly pulled back, gasping. Ethan realized she had never seen fire up close, at least not like this. Her people must have used other forms of energy. To her, this was something new, something only he had given. Her violet eyes returned to him, sharper this time. She spoke again, pointing at his wound, then at the fire. She mimed burning, her face tense with warning. She thought he was reckless, even foolish, for fighting predators with nothing but stones and making dangerous fire with his bare hands. She finally said a word he did understand. Weak. Ethan blinked. Weak? He repeated, his voice low. She nodded firmly, repeating it again, weak, and pointed at him. Then she placed her hand over her heart and spoke proudly in her language, her words full of strength. It was clear she was telling him her people were warriors, strong and proud, not like fragile humans. Ethan clenched his jaw. He had heard it before in other places, from other species. Humans being called weak, too soft, too emotional. But he said nothing. Instead, he reached for a long branch, pressed it into the flames, and pulled it out, its tip glowing red. Slowly, carefully, he pressed the burning end against his wound. The smell of scorched flesh filled the cave. Pain exploded in his body, making his vision blur, but he did not make a sound. He held the stick steady until the bleeding stopped. Then he dropped it and leaned back, breathing hard. Lyra's eyes widened. She had expected him to scream, maybe even faint, but he had done it with silence, with grim strength. She touched her lips, staring at him like she was seeing him for the first time. He met her gaze, his voice hoarse but steady. Weak? He asked. She did not answer. Instead, she lowered her eyes, ashamed. The firelight danced across the cave, and the silence grew heavy between them. Finally, she spoke again, slower this time, searching for words he might know. She pointed at herself. Hunted, she said. Then she crossed her wrists like chains and lowered her head. Punished. Ethan frowned. He leaned closer. Hunted? Why? Lyra's face twisted with pain, her eyes filling with tears. She whispered in her tongue, the words flowing like water, though he couldn't understand them. But from her expression, he understood enough. Her own people wanted her dead. She was running, not from the flood, but from soldiers who would kill her if they found her. Ethan felt a weight in his chest. She was alone, just like him, a fugitive in a hostile world. He reached out slowly, not touching her, but placing his hand close. She looked at him, her eyes wet with firelight, and for the first time she did not pull away. Then a sound cut through the night, the faint crunch of footsteps on wet stone. Ethan froze. Lyra's head snapped toward the cave entrance. Shadows flickered outside, not from lightning, but from torches. Voices murmured in a tongue Ethan did not know, but Lyra's face went pale. She whispered one word, trembling. Hunters. Ethan's muscles tightened. He had nothing but a fire-hardened stick in his bare hands. She had no armor, no weapon, only fear. Yet when their eyes met, something passed between them. She had thought him weak, but he had already fought the river, the storm, and the predators for her. She knew he would fight again. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until shadows moved just outside the cave. Ethan gripped the burning stick tighter, his jaw set. The flood had forced them together. The predators had tested their bond, and now the hunters had come. The night was not finished with them yet. The cave grew darker as the sound of footsteps echoed closer. The fire between Ethan and Lyra crackled softly, but its light was now a danger, a signal for anyone outside. Ethan quickly kicked dirt over the flames, smothering them until only smoke curled in the air. The sudden darkness pressed around them, but his ears caught every sound, the dripping of water, the shuffle of boots, the low murmur of voices speaking in a language he did not know. Lyra's body trembled beside him, her glowing violet eyes giving away her fear. She covered them with her hands, as if even her own light might betray them. Ethan crouched low, moving silently toward the cave entrance. He picked up a long rock, sharp on one end, the only weapon he could find. His wound ached badly, but adrenaline pushed the pain aside. He peered out through a gap in the stone. There were 3 of them at first. Tall figures, their bodies covered in black armor that gleamed wet from the rain. Strange weapons hung in their hands, long and cruel, humming faintly with alien energy. Lyra let out a sharp breath. She whispered something, voice breaking, and Ethan turned to see her eyes wide with terror. She pointed at the soldiers, then at herself, making the same crossed wrist gesture as before. He understood. These were the ones hunting her. The soldiers moved like predators, their heads turning, scanning the rocks and trees as though they already knew she was close. One of them stepped nearer the cave, his boots splashing in the shallow pools left by the flood. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. If the soldier entered, there would be no hiding. He tightened his grip on the rock. Lyra's hand touched his arm, stopping him. She shook her head, whispering fast in her language, her tone desperate. From her eyes, he knew what she meant. Don't fight. We can't win. But Ethan could also see something else in her gaze. Resignation. The look of someone who had been running too long and no longer believed in escape. That look set a fire inside him. He leaned close and whispered back in his own tongue, knowing she wouldn't understand, but hoping she would feel the meaning. I'm not letting them take you. The first soldier ducked his head into the cave. His glowing visor cut through the dark, scanning. Ethan pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath. Lyra curled tighter, praying the shadows would hide her. But then the soldier's visor turned toward her faint glow. She gasped despite herself. The soldier raised his weapon. Ethan exploded from the shadows. With all his strength, he slammed the rock into the soldier's head. Sparks flew as the visor cracked, and the alien staggered back with a muffled roar. Before the soldier could recover, Ethan grabbed his arm and twisted, forcing the weapon away. The alien was stronger, but Ethan's fury gave him speed. He drove the rock into the soft joint of the armor, again and again, until the soldier fell limp into the mud outside. The other two shouted in alarm, rushing forward. Lyra screamed his name, at least a version of it, broken and panicked. Ethan grabbed the fallen weapon, its strange metal cold in his hands. He aimed without understanding and pulled the trigger. A bolt of burning light shot out, hitting the nearest soldier in the chest. The alien crashed against the rocks, armor smoking. The third soldier froze, his visor locked on Ethan. For a moment, there was silence. Only the rain, only the storm, only the smoke from the strange gun. Then the soldier laughed. The sound was muffled through the helmet, but the word he spoke was clear, even in a language Ethan barely knew. Human. It wasn't said like an insult. It was said like recognition, like shock that a human still lived, still fought in a place where they were supposed to be extinct. The soldier raised his weapon slowly, almost reverently, as if looking at a ghost. Lyra's face paled. She whispered, "They know you." Ethan's mind spun. How could they know him? He was a wanderer, a stranger in this world. But the soldier's stare held no doubt. This was not the first time his name or face had reached alien ears. The standoff broke in an instant. The soldier fired. Ethan dove aside, the bolt of light sizzling against the stone wall. The cave lit up for a heartbeat, and the smell of burned rock filled the air. Lyra screamed again, her voice raw, and something inside Ethan snapped. He surged forward, not thinking, just moving, the weapon in his hands shaking as he fired wildly. The bolt struck true, and the last soldier fell into the mud, lifeless. Silence. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, weapon smoking in his grip. The storm outside still raged, but the hunters lay broken in the mud. His heart pounded with disbelief. He had killed them. 3 trained soldiers, and he had survived. Lyra crawled to him, her body shaking. She touched his arm gently, her eyes wide not with fear, but with awe. Her lips trembled as she spoke slowly, carefully, using the only words she knew he would understand. "Strong," she whispered. Ethan almost laughed, but the sound died in his throat. He looked down at the soldiers. Their faces were hidden, but their armor carried symbols he did not know. Yet one thing was clear. They hadn't just been hunting Lyra. They had been hunting him too. Questions filled his mind. How did they know him? Why had the alien called him by his species with such certainty, as though humans were rare, almost legends? And why did Lyra, with her violet eyes full of secrets, look both relieved and terrified at the same time? The answers did not come. Instead, only the storm remained, and the truth that running would no longer be enough. The flood had pushed them together. The predators had tested their survival, and now the hunters had revealed a darker game. Ethan was no longer just a man trying to live. He was something more in their eyes, something dangerous, something they believed should have been dead already. And now, because of that, both he and Lyra were marked. The storm did not calm. Instead, it grew even more violent as the night deepened. Rain came in sheets, and thunder shook the rocks beneath them. Ethan held the strange alien weapon tight in his hands, still warm from firing. Beside him, Lyra leaned against the cave wall, breathing hard. Her eyes followed every shadow, every sound, as though more hunters might appear at any moment. The bodies of the soldiers lay outside in the mud, quickly being swallowed by the flood. Ethan knew they could not stay. The cave was no longer safe. Once these soldiers failed to report back, more would come. And the storm was breaking the land apart. Every crack of thunder sent small rocks tumbling down. If the cave collapsed, they would be buried alive. He turned to Lyra. She was shivering, not just from cold, but from fear. He pointed outside, then upward, showing her they needed to climb higher. She hesitated, her lips trembling as she whispered something in her language, shaking her head. She was too weak, too afraid. Ethan crouched in front of her, catching her gaze. He placed his hand on his chest and said firmly, "Ethan." Then he pointed at her. "Lyra." Finally, he pressed his hand over his heart and whispered, "Together." She stared at him for a long moment, then gave a small, reluctant nod. They stepped out into the storm again. The rain slapped against their bare skin like knives, and the wind howled so loudly it almost knocked them back into the cave. Ethan grabbed Lyra's hand tightly, pulling her forward as they began to climb the slippery rocks. Each step was a battle. The mud slid beneath their feet, and water poured over the rocks in heavy streams. Lightning flashed above them, revealing the jungle below now drowned completely. Trees floated like broken toys, and whole sections of earth had been eaten by the raging water. Halfway up the slope, a sudden crack split the air. The rock beneath them gave way. Ethan shouted, pushing Lyra upward, but the ground collapsed under his legs. He slid down, grabbing onto a root with one hand while the other still clutched the weapon. The river below roared, waiting to swallow him. Lyra screamed his name and threw herself down, reaching for him. Their fingers brushed but slipped apart in the rain. "Go!" Ethan shouted, his voice raw, but Lyra shook her head wildly. She slid further down until she caught his wrist with both hands. The strength in her grip shocked him. For someone so slight, she held on with the power of desperation. He kicked against the sliding mud, fighting his way back, until finally he found another foothold. Together they pulled, inch by inch, until he scrambled back onto the slope. Both collapsed against the wet stone, gasping. But the storm gave no rest. A wall of water rushed down from above, crashing against them. The waves slammed Ethan into the rock, knocking the air from his chest. He grabbed Lyra around the waist, holding her tight so the current wouldn't drag her away. The two of them were thrown sideways, tumbling down into a narrow ravine carved by the flood. They landed hard in knee-deep water, surrounded by falling debris. Ethan struggled to his feet, coughing. The alien weapon was gone, ripped from his hands. Lyra clung to him, her eyes wide with panic. Another flash of lightning showed their path, an opening ahead where the ravine led deeper into the jungle. But the water was rushing too fast. It would sweep them away if they weren't careful. They waded forward, each step dragging their bodies heavier. Ethan's muscles screamed with exhaustion, but he refused to let go of her. She stumbled many times, and each time he pulled her up. She looked at him with an expression that was no longer just fear. It was trust. She was letting him lead, her life in his hands. Then, without warning, a roar echoed through the storm. The water surged higher, a massive wave crashing through the ravine. Ethan had no time to think. He grabbed Lyra, lifted her as high as he could, and threw her toward a ledge sticking out of the rock wall. She caught the edge with her fingers, screaming as the flood rose around her. Ethan tried to climb after her, but the waves smashed into him, tearing him away. He was dragged under, spinning through the black water. Lyra's scream cut through the thunder as she saw him vanish. Her body shook violently as she tried to pull herself higher. Her nails bled as she dug into the stone, but she didn't let go. She pulled herself onto the ledge, coughing and crying, her eyes searching the water below. She called his name again and again, her voice breaking, but there was no answer. Below, the river twisted and turned, carrying Ethan away. His body slammed against rocks, his lungs burning as water filled them. He fought to reach the surface, but the current was too strong. Darkness crept into his vision, and for a moment he thought it was the end. But then, deep inside, something sparked. He thought of Lyra's eyes, wide with fear, trusting him to protect her. He thought of the promise he had made, together. With the last of his strength, he kicked hard, breaking through the surface. The stormy air filled his lungs like fire, but he was alive. He reached for the side of the ravine, grabbing a root sticking out of the stone. The current pulled, but he held on with both hands, refusing to let go. Slowly, painfully, he dragged himself up onto the rocks. His body shook with exhaustion, blood dripping from cuts and bruises. Above, Lyra saw him. Relief burst across her face, her tears mixing with the rain. She crawled down from the ledge, slipping and stumbling, until she reached him. She threw her arms around him, holding him tightly, as if to make sure he was real. For the first time, she whispered his name without mistake. "Ethan," he coughed, forcing a weak smile. "Told you?" Together. The storm still raged around them, tearing the jungle apart. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. They were alive. They had survived again. But both of them knew this was not the end. The hunters would return. The flood would not stop. And their bond, forged in water and fire, was becoming something far more dangerous than either of them had expected. The storm began to fade at last, though the jungle was still broken and drowning in water. The air was heavy with mist, and fallen trees lay across the flooded ground like skeletons. Ethan sat on a rock, his body trembling with exhaustion. His wounds burned, and his arms felt too heavy to lift, but his eyes stayed fixed on Lyra. She knelt beside him, her blue skin shining faintly in the weak dawn light. Her hands pressed against his injuries, with cloth torn from her own clothing, trying to stop the bleeding. She whispered to herself as she worked, words in her language, soft and careful. He did not understand them, but her tone was gentle, almost like a prayer. Each time she looked at him, her eyes filled with something new, something he had not seen before. Gratitude, yes, but also something warmer, something she seemed afraid to admit even to herself. When she finally pulled back, her hands shaking, she met his eyes. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy but not empty. It carried everything they had survived together. The flood, the predators, the soldiers. It was the silence of two people bound by more than just fear. Ethan broke it with a rough whisper. "We can't stay here." He pointed toward the distant hills where the jungle rose into sharp cliffs. If they climbed high enough, they might find safety. Lyra followed his hand, then shook her head slowly. Her lips parted as she spoke, her voice trembling. She said his name clear this time, Ethan. Then she placed her hand over her heart. After a pause, she whispered another word, bond. He frowned, confused. She repeated it again, her voice firmer, bond. Then she pointed to herself, then to him. Her eyes glistened with meaning. Ethan's chest tightened. He realized what she was saying. In her culture, saving someone's life was not just an act of kindness. It created a link, a tie stronger than law. By pulling her from the flood, by fighting predators for her, by standing against the hunters, he had become more than a stranger. He was her protector, her chosen. Before he could answer, a shout cut through the jungle. Both turned sharply. More soldiers appeared from the trees, their armor black and shining with water, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. At least 6 of them this time, moving fast and sure, their eyes fixed on Lyra. She gasped, fear freezing her body. Ethan stood, though his legs wavered. He had no weapon now, nothing but his own strength. But he moved in front of her without thinking, his arms spread, his body a shield. The soldiers slowed when they saw him. Their visors glowed red, scanning him, and one of them hissed a word in their language. But then, in a voice harsh yet clear, the leader spoke in broken human tongue. Impossible. Human should be dead. Ethan's blood ran cold. These words again. They had said it before. These soldiers knew him, or at least they knew what he was. To them, a human surviving here was something unnatural, something forbidden. The leader raised his weapon. Lyra cried out and threw herself in front of Ethan, her arms spread wide, her violet eyes burning with defiance. She shouted in her language, her voice carrying across the storm-torn jungle. Ethan could not understand the words, but the soldiers froze. Her voice shook with power, with the authority of someone who belonged to a noble house. The soldiers hesitated, their weapons lowering slightly. The leader barked something in anger, but Lyra shouted louder, her hand pointing at Ethan. Her tone was fierce, commanding. Finally, she said one word in human tongue so he would understand. Protector. The silence that followed was heavy. The soldiers shifted uneasily, looking at one another. To challenge her words was to challenge their own laws. Ethan realized the truth. In her culture, by naming him as her protector, she had placed him under sacred tradition. They could not touch him without breaking their own code. The leader growled, but after a tense pause, he gave a sharp gesture. Slowly, reluctantly, the soldiers lowered their weapons. One by one, they stepped back into the jungle shadows until only the storm's echo remained. Lyra fell to her knees, her body shaking from the effort. Ethan knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "What did you do?" he whispered. She lifted her head, tears running down her face. Her lips trembled as she answered in broken human words. "Now you are mine." His heart pounded. He searched her eyes, finding no joke there, no trick. She meant it. By saving her, by standing for her, he had been bound into her world's laws. Their fates were tied. Ethan looked at the jungle around them, at the bodies hidden beneath the water, at the storm still whispering through the trees. Everything had changed. He was no longer just a survivor. He was part of something larger, something dangerous. Lyra leaned against him, her small body trembling, but she clung to him with both hands, as though letting go was no longer possible. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, his eyes hard as he stared into the mist. The flood had brought them together. The predators had tested their strength. The soldiers had revealed their secret. And now, with dawn rising weakly over the broken land, Ethan understood one thing clearly. Their bond was not just survival. It was defiance. It was forbidden, and it would change both their lives forever.